Alert, we are awaiting Donald Trump at a rally in the political battleground state of North Carolina. He's expected to talk terrorism and to go after Hillary Clinton and President Obama over what he calls their quote-unquote weak leadership when it comes to keeping America safe. And we have the new details about the man accused of planting bombs around New York City and New Jersey and his possible radicalization overseas. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Sandra Smith. Radio talk show host Meghan McCain, Republican strategist Lisa Booth, today's hashtag one lucky guy, the former ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador John Bolton, is here. He's outnumbered and so glad to have you.
Glad to be here. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, this is a big day. We've got the UN General Assembly going on here in New York and a lot of terror to talk about today, so we're glad to get your perspective. Thanks for being here. All right, well, while we bring you the news this hour, Donald Trump is about to speak in North Carolina. We'll bring you that as it happens. And the terror takedown that ended in a hail of bullets is raising new questions about how America deals with homegrown terror. 28-year-old Ahmaud Rahimi was arrested and now in a Newark, New Jersey hospital. He's accused of terrorizing New York City and the metro area with bombs. His bond is set at more than $5 million as he awaits federal charges. The FBI is looking at how the Afghan-born U.S. citizen became radicalized after recent trips to Afghanistan, multiple trips. A friend telling local media Rahimi grew a beard and seemed different after one of those visits. And in Minnesota, where a knife-wielding savage went after people at a suburban shopping mall, his friends are today saying he seemed like, quote, a normal American kid who played sports and did well in school until Saturday night. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris joins us live from Washington. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Harris. Just a short time ago, the suspect's father spoke to reporters in New Jersey, and there he alleged that he had contacted the feds about his son in 2014 after a domestic dispute.
2 years ago, I called the API. My son, he's doing very bad, okay? But they checked it almost 2 months.
What's still going on, guys?
He's okay.
We don't know yet.
He's not a terrorist. I said, okay. Now he says he's a terrorist. I said, okay.
We also have new evidence today about that prior contact between the suspect and the FBI in approximately 2014. What we were told through 2 law enforcement sources is that they had allegations that he was becoming radicalized. They then went and they questioned him about this radicalization, but there was simply not enough to go on at that time to determine that they could open a full investigation. We also have new information about evidence that was found at the scene. 2 sources told us that there was a note that was found with the pressure cooker bomb that was intact. It contained Arabic writing and symbols that were consistent with ISIS. We're working to independently confirm reports that there were also references to the Boston Marathon bombing. Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev, they also used pressure cooker bombs to kill 3 and injure 264 others in that Boston Marathon in 2013. And we're also working to confirm that there was a reference in the note to this man, Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born cleric who was really the father of the digital jihad. He was the first American targeted for death by the CIA and killed in a drone strike in 2011. And while officially, or at least publicly, the feds are saying they're not looking for anyone else right now who's connected to Rahimi, the head of the House Homeland Security Committee said they haven't ruled out others.
We can't at this point in time. Now, remember, the cell phones are being analyzed for what's called encrypted communications for any contact. His computers are being analyzed for any conversations he would have had with operatives, perhaps in Pakistan or Afghanistan or out of Raqqa, Syria.
Just a little bit more on his travel overseas. There's really growing evidence today that this is where the seeds of his radicalization were sown. We were able to confirm through 2 sources that there were at least 3 trips to Afghanistan, and he did travel to Pakistan, though it's not clear from our reporting whether he crossed over the border from Afghanistan to Pakistan or whether there were discrete trips to Pakistan from the United States. In any event, this was known to Homeland Security and the FBI, but because he had longstanding ties to Afghanistan and the frequency of the trips was not so high that it suggested he was getting outside help to pay for it, this did not arouse suspicion at the time about his activities.
We appreciate all that information. Catherine, thank you very much. We'll inject it now into the conversation. I guess my first big question for you, Ambassador, will there be new rules about Americans coming back into this country after they've been to certain places? And I know it gets complicated in this particular incident or instance because he was also in Pakistan. That's a country that we typically have very good relations with. But we know what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan. We know what's happening in Syria.
Well, it's happening in Pakistan, too, depending on what part of the country you're in. I mean, I think from the Minnesota incident and from the New Jersey, New York incidents, we've got to start learning some lessons about what this terrorism is actually about. And I think these cases are further pieces of evidence that this is an ideology that's fighting us. This is not about economic grievances or economic deprivation. It's not about the personal peculiarities of the terrorists themselves. It is about an ideology, and we need to learn from that. We need to learn how the ideology grows, because we've divided the terrorist incidents into categories that don't make sense. You have workplace violence, you have lone wolves, you have self-radicalizing, you have domestic versus international. Look, I think these are distinctions that obscure what's really going on. And I think this case, the New York case in particular, shows that. So these are the lessons we need to start talking about.
So what heading would you give it all?
I think we are faced in the United States and the broader West with an ideology that's determined to destroy us, or at least inflict as much damage as we can. And unless you treat this as an ideological war, we will forever be inadequate in our response.
Ambassador, Americans are listening to that report from Catherine Herridge that the father saw changes in his own son, called the FBI. The FBI came and looked at him. They determined after questioning he was not a terrorist. They moved on. While he was a terrorist, and he did have bad intentions after multiple visits there, Americans are left asking the question, is our system right? Are we going about questioning these people in the right way? How did he fall through the cracks?
Yeah, I think this requires some real serious congressional investigation. We're not going to get it before the election. We need to get it after the election. When a parent turns a child in as a potential terrorist, you would think people would take it seriously. I have to wonder whether the FBI, law enforcement agencies at the federal and local levels are constrained by the view that it's not an ideology. There's no war here. It's just occasional, incidental, random acts of terrorism. And if that's the case, if we have handcuffed ourselves, I think the American people need to know that. I think they'd be outraged.
Lisa?
Well, isn't this also emblematic of the new face of terror, the new war on terror? I mean, we're looking 15 years post 9/11, and it's these lone wolf attackers, which has been likened to essentially finding a needle in the haystack. And this is something that the world is grappling with. It's not just the United States. You look at all these either ISIS-directed or inspired attacks by lone wolf individuals, both in the United States, Orlando, San Bernardino, Chattanooga, or looking elsewhere around the world as well. You look at, Belgium. I mean, there's all these, terror attacks that we're seeing, these lone wolf attackers, and this is sort of the new face on terror.
Well, and you can add Minnesota to that list.
Minnesota, yes.
Megan, I think you were here on the program when I had first come back from Minneapolis, looking at where they had just recently this summer opened a 4th counterterrorism FBI office, and just on August 25th found guilty, the 11th man from Minnesota trying to join ISIS.
Well, when I first heard this story, I have friends who are Muslim. And if they were going back and forth to Afghanistan and came back and started acting a lot more religious, a lot more radical, I would say something to someone. I really would. The problem is we're living in a culture where if a boy brings a clock to school that by anybody's standard looks like a bomb, automatically you're called racist, the president gets involved, the media gets involved.
You get a trip to the White House.
You get a trip to the White House. But I think beyond that, this is cultural. Americans may be seeing something, which, as you said, the father of this terrorist did. He said something. Again, if people are doing their due diligence, or they're not because they feel like they'll be labeled as racist, there's something very wrong with all of this because nothing ends up happening. As you said, if a father says, my son is behaving crazy, and then nothing happens, what kind of message does this send the American public?
Yeah, Ambassador, I want to give you the last word on what we should be looking for.
Well, I think you have to look at the sources of the ideology and how it spreads, because the terrorist network doesn't conform to a corporate organization chart. It's much more fluid. And if we don't acknowledge that and try and deal with it, we will fail consistently to prevent these attacks.
But we know, even when those red flags were raised with the kid, as they described him, a normal American kid in Minnesota, a lot was just kind of pushed aside. It's an interesting dilemma and a dangerous one. Well, we are awaiting a Donald Trump rally in North Carolina just a day after the Republican nominee and his opponent traded attacks over anti-terror policy. The back and forth and how it could reshape the election. What are we, 49 days now? And White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest called the fight against the Islamic State savages a war of narratives. Is that really what it is? And right after we wrap up here on TV, we pop up online, and you can join our live chat by clicking the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered. That's our page. Go there. We also have a page on Facebook as well, and our handle is Outnumbered FNC Facebook Live. Yeah, you can watch us live. And, of course, you can tweet us at any time. Sandra's already on her phone. Here we go to the commercial. We're coming right back.
We are awaiting remarks from Donald Trump at this hour. He's holding a rally in North Carolina a day after he and Hillary Clinton had some very sharp words for each other over fighting terrorism.
The President of the United States or my opponent, and both, won't even say the words radical Islamic terror. In fact, Hillary Clinton talks tougher about my supporters than she does about Islamic terrorists.
We know that a lot of the rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump has been seized on by terrorists, in particular ISIS, because they are looking to make this into a war against Islam.
To hear the words Hillary Clinton uses, one could be forgiven for getting the impression that she thinks these hardworking Americans are somehow a greater threat to our country than Islamic extremists.
We know that Donald Trump's comments have been used online for recruitment of terrorists.
Hillary Clinton is a weak and ineffective person.
You don't hear a plan from him. He keeps saying he has a secret plan. Well, the secret is he has no plan. Former CIA Director Michael Hayden, who made it a very clear point when he said Donald Trump is being used as a recruiting sergeant for the terrorists.
So you just heard the two candidates, Ambassador, trading barbs there. Who's making the best case?
Well, I think Trump comes across as someone who takes the terrorist threat more seriously than Hillary Clinton does. And I think in the political environment, if he can shape opinion, of the public opinion, so that people see her as Obama's third term, I think it's to his advantage. And I think she would be Obama's third term. I think her policies would be essentially those of Obama's. And I think in that sense, the terrorist incidents we've just had, coming just as they do right before the first debate, could have a major impact on the election as people watch the two of them next Tuesday and compare their attitudes. I think Trump sees this as a war, and I don't think Hillary Clinton does. I think she sees it like Obama does, as a law enforcement.
You heard that first exchange from Trump, Lisa, reiterating words we have heard many times from him along the way, that she and her campaign won't even use the words radical Islamic terrorism.
Well, and there's this perceived weakness of President Obama and Hillary Clinton in the fight against ISIS. I think that's the reason why Donald Trump does so well on that question. But to Hillary Clinton's earlier point, her own husband has been featured in an ISIS video, and President Obama himself has said that he has no plan to defeat ISIS. And if you're Donald Trump, he should lay the rise of ISIS at the feet of Hillary Clinton and President Obama. President Obama's own defense secretaries have blamed him for the rise of ISIS, leaving a vacuum in Iraq. And now ISIS has a foothold in 18 different countries. Hillary Clinton cheerleaded that withdrawal of forces from Iraq and the failure to leave a status of forces agreement. So Donald Trump should lay this at their feet and also blame them for just this weakness on the fight against terror.
And he is, to that effect, Megan. He said her attacks on me are all meant to deflect from her own record.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he's running, or that's what she's running against right now, is whether she likes it or not, she is attached to the rise of ISIS, which happened after President Obama, whom she worked for in the administration, pulled out of Iraq. ISIS came in and metastasized, and this evil, which people have been saying for 8 years, we should get the snake, cut the head off the snake, go to the base of where it's all at. They have ignored it. As you said, they see it as I don't think they see it as a war. I think they see it as a law enforcement issue. And the fact that we have an administration that still won't say radical jihadism, won't say radical terrorism, tells you everything you need to know. I actually think if this is brought up in the debate, it's a really ample opportunity for Donald Trump to show just the juxtaposition between their two.
I want to keep it on this same topic. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest getting some criticism for saying we are fighting a, quote, war of narratives against ISIS. He made the comments on CNN and MSNBC, then was asked about it on America's Newsroom on Fox News Channel yesterday. Watch.
What's important in the context of the political debate is to remember that ISIL is trying to assert a narrative that they represent the religion of Islam in a war against the West and in a war against the United States. That is a mythology. That is a falsehood. That is not true. That is a bankrupt ideology that they are trying to wrap in the cloak of Islam. And it is important that we don't play into that narrative.
Republican VP nominee Mike Pence not having it.
Well, I'm not sure that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama know that we're at war. The White House spokesman today actually said that we were in a, quote, narrative fight, in a narrative battle.
What is that? What is that?
I don't even know what that is. I'll be honest with you, I was just mystified by it. You know, I really don't understand what a narrative fight or a narrative battle is. I mean, we need new leadership in this country that will name our enemy.
And you heard the voice of Rush Limbaugh challenging that notion of a war of narratives. Is this a misguided White House, Ambassador?
It's a dream world. Look, academics call this semiotics. It's the science of signals and symbols, and that's what they do at the White House. They maneuver words around and talk in narratives. You know what ISIS does for semiotic warfare? They cut people's heads off.
Exactly.
That's how they behave. And you know what they respect? They respect force, which they're seeing in inadequate amounts from the United States at this point. So we can either have a real war against terrorism and try and defeat these barbarians, or we can engage in more semiotics, which is what Obama and Clinton did.
It's hard, as Harris says. We heard those words coming from the White House press secretary. What? Especially in the wake of the news this week.
A lot comes out of the representatives that really does not surprise me anymore. I mean, look at Ben Rhodes and what he says he fed to reporters about the Iran deal.
They have to reflect the president. They're not making this up.
Yeah,
They're hearing it from the boss.
It starts at the top. You have been a witness to history at the United Nations as an ambassador. And some of the criticism that Hillary Clinton has lobbed over at Donald Trump, I'm curious quickly to ask you about. Are his words when he says, you know, use whatever lawful methods are available to go after the man that they just captured, who's a suspect here on the East Coast, are his words really putting us in opposition or harm's way with our allies and their potential to help us out? Are they really making us more unsafe? I'm just curious to get your vision.
Absolutely not. Look, this is ISIS will pick any pretext it can find to attack the United States. Gitmo, whatever it is. We could close Gitmo, they'd find another pretext. If Donald Trump didn't say something they could use, somebody else would. So it's really a question whether you understand the bigger picture or whether you're lost in the tactics. And I think we're going to find, unfortunately, if Hillary's elected, she's always lost in the tactics.
All right, we've got so much more to get to. Despite the terror attacks this weekend, President Obama today stepping up his push to bring in more refugees. But can we trust the government's vetting process? And is now really the time to be accelerating bringing in more refugees? Plus, why one polling analyst says the first presidential debate in just 6 days, can you believe it, will be a turning point in this election. And new details on the high-stakes face-off next.
We have to open our hearts and do more to help refugees who are desperate. And we should all understand that ultimately our world will be more secure if we are prepared to help those in need and the nations who are carrying the largest burden with respect to accommodating these refugees.
That was not that long ago. The president took the stage for his final address as president to the United Nations General Assembly while he's in office, pushing nations to take more action to address the refugee crisis. He was. This, as the White House signals it will raise the worldwide limit on the number of refugees entering the United States to 110,000 next year, up from 85,000 this year. The administration, however, is not saying how many will come from Syria, where you know there's that civil war going on and where ISIS is nesting like scorpions. This is raising concerns that terrorists could actually slip through the cracks. So when you hear the pushback from the critics of that statement and from the Obama administration that will never happen, that could never happen, we're vetting them, we're doing it, what comes to mind?
Well, I just think it's a complete misapprehension of our ability to gather the information. But even more fundamentally, what the president and others have talked about by bringing more refugees into the United States or Western Europe is a repudiation of half a century of refugee policy. The obligation, and I think we should provide humanitarian assistance, but the obligation falls first on what they call the country of first asylum, so Turkey in the case of Syrian refugees. And we should provide food, shelter, humanitarian assistance. We have no obligation to take these people out of those refugee camps. Let's just start right there.
All right. I do want to broaden this out just a smidge, if we can, with that report that came out about how we're handling the people already in our country. And if we can't get that right, how do we expect to have more come in? And that's what the 850 or so.
Oh, so you're talking about the fact that our government mistakenly granted citizenship to 858 immigrants who had pending deportation orders from countries of concern. There was a few things that were going on there that allowed this in, fingerprints and et cetera. The information that was being given allowed for this accident to happen. But Ambassador, don't you think that even President Obama's critics would be more forgiving of him wanting to see this surge of refugees coming into this country if he spoke as tough on the vetting process, saying it's a difficult one, but we have figured it out and here's how we're doing it? But we just don't hear that when he says he's accelerating the process and bringing more in.
Sure. Well, as we say in Washington, good enough for government work. It just did 180 degrees the opposite of what they intended to do. And it also highlights, again, in refugee policy, asylum is temporary. It lasts only so long as the condition that provoked the people to leave lasts. So when the conflict is over, that is to say, winning the war against ISIS, then they go back. But really, does anybody think once these people come in, they're ever leaving the United States?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, also, his own administration has stated the concerns of letting the Syrian refugees in. You have the CIA Director, John Brennan, who testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee that ISIS would infiltrate the West through Syrian migrants and refugees. You also have FBI Director James Comey, who said before a House Homeland Security Committee that we can't thoroughly vet the refugees. Then you have this incompetency with the 800 immigrants that were given citizenship from countries of national security concerns. You also have the Department of Homeland Security officials testifying before Congress, admitting that they can't find individuals whose visas were revoked because of possible links to terrorism. They can't find them in the United States. Of course we have to question the government's competency here.
All right. So your father, senator of one of the states sitting on a porous border I guess is the best description of our southern border with Mexico at times. And we know of at least some reporting where they might try to come across that border too. So it might not even just be an immigration situation where we're tracking them into the United States, but what if they come through other countries? I'm just curious to
I mean, it's definitely a possibility. I think what's so exhausting about this specific issue is it didn't have to be like this. There was a red line that our president said he would do something about once Assad used chemical weapons. He did, and then our president chose to do nothing. So this has spiraled out of control, and the blood is on the administration's hands. All that being said, it is completely rational to have fear about this. See what's going on in Germany. They have ran out of pepper spray because so many women need to arm themselves because there's so many sexual assaults happening from refugees. So this is completely rational and based in reality. That being said, when you talk to a lot of liberals about this, automatically I'm a heartless conservative that doesn't want to help refugees, that doesn't want to help children in the Middle East. That's not true. We just want to protect our national security as well. I think this is a mess. I think nothing good is going to come from it, and I think no matter what the answer, we got a lot of bad problems problems in our future.
And the big question is, it's a mess for sure. We know that the immigration situation is one that needs to be looked at. Is it a dangerous mess? And you say yes.
It's absolutely dangerous, and we see the evidence all around us.
Well, it's also just applying common sense, as Megan pointed out.
Yeah, Megan?
I mean, yes. Thank you. All right, on to this now. It's less than 1 week until the first presidential debate, and we're learning the three main themes that will be covered. The topics: America's direction, achieving prosperity, and securing America. This as a Quinnipiac University polling analyst telling Politico the first debate could break the polling stalemate. Tim Malloy saying, quote, "It's going to come down to the debate. I think you're going to find out just how much of a grip Trump has on policy. You'll see how they handle each other. I think it could be one of the classic heavyweight fights of all time." Okay, I, for one, I'm getting my Jack Daniels and popcorn ready already. I've been looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to this forever. Lisa, I want to start with you. The topics couldn't be more vague. American prosperity. Awesome.
Well, and they need to give out, like, what is it, the heavyweight belt after to the winner so they can hold it up after. It is really pivotal. I honest to God think that this first debate is going to be so pivotal, because if you look at Donald Trump right now, he certainly has the momentum heading into the first debate. He is gaining nationally. He's gaining in battleground states. And so he either is going to be able to perform well during the debate and carry that momentum out potentially to November 8th, or it could be an opportunity where he misstates something. Hillary Clinton nails him down on policy, or she baits him into saying something that he shouldn't say, and then he loses that momentum. So I really do think it's going to be a big moment. Or if you're Hillary Clinton, it's an opportunity for her to try to regain the momentum that she has recently lost. So I really do think this first debate is going to be so pivotal.
All right, so your question was about the vagueness of it all. I guess, looking on the bright side, it means you can cover a lot of topics, but it also leaves a lot of room for people to kind of go in one direction and maybe look at the drama more than the substance, because it's not being driven by, and to borrow a word from Josh Earnest today, the narrative of having more succinct topics.
I want to say something that's a little politically incorrect, but one of the things I'm actually curious about is how healthy Hillary Clinton is going to look, if she's going to get into a coughing fit, if she's going to look tired. I actually think this will be something that's really important and pivotal. Ambassador Bolton, you're shaking your head. Do you agree with me?
No, I think that's right. I have to say, I don't like these debates at all. I don't like the debates that occurred in the primary season.
You don't like a debate? You can watch them with me. I make it fun.
I haven't liked it for about 50 years. I think it ought to be a real debate between the candidates. I think Trump is on to something here.
Moderators out?
Let me ask you a key question. Who moderated the Lincoln-Douglas debate?
Oh, yeah, I figured you were going to
Nobody. There was a timekeeper. That's all there was. And that's what we ought to go back to.
By the way, you're only 55 now. So they let you into the U.S.
But Megan, let me turn the tables back on you as somebody who has lived and breathed politics your entire life. Isn't a lot of this going to come down to specifically how they're preparing for these debates, not just what they have in their back pocket, but how they prepare? As you know, and unfairly you criticize those debates that I moderated 2 of them, Ambassador.
Oh yeah, she's a moderator.
And there's a really interesting thing that happens when you sit down and you moderate the debate. You look at the candidates, and whether or not they look at each other, whether or not they keep their eyes on the audience, or if they respond personally and to the face of the person next to them, there is so much that goes on there, and I just wonder what kind of debate prep that they're involved in right now.
Well, I think at least historically it's arduous, but Donald Trump, I guess, has done it a little bit less conventionally, as he's done everything. I actually think this is going to come down to, just like everything else, a few moments. Binders full of women, Kitty Dukakis with, Dukakis' wife saying what he would do if she were raped and killed. Like, there's always significant moments that will stand out in history, and I think this will be like every other one.
I could see Donald Trump, though, just to Sandra's point, having more gumption to actually look right at Hillary Clinton.
I think he's got to be very careful, though, because he's a large man. She's a small woman. She's going to look for the being picked on point. He needs to exert iron discipline to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, it can also be the unsaid, because you go back to the John F. Kennedy Nixon debate, and it was his appearance that was put, the sweating, the uncomfortableness. And for Hillary Clinton, whose health has been brought into question by just the video itself on 9/11, that is something that voters are going to be looking at.
Well, I'm excited about it, and you can come to my house because it'll be fun, at least watching with me. All right? Donald Trump is slamming the New York bombing suspect's right to an attorney, as another top Republican says he should be held as an enemy combatant so we can get as much info out of him as possible. Is this a good idea?
Fox News alert on the man suspected of planting bombs around New York and New Jersey. Ahmed Khan Rahami is still in the hospital after yesterday's shootout with police. He's charged with the attempted murder of those officers. Federal prosecutors are still weighing charges connected to the bombings that injured 29 people. Meantime, Donald Trump is speaking out against the treatment the suspect is getting.
Now we will give him amazing hospitalization. He will be taken care of by some of the best doctors in the world. He will be given a fully modern and updated hospital room. And on top of all of that, he will be represented by an outstanding lawyer. His case will go through the various court systems for years, and in the end, people will forget, and his punishment will not be what it once would have been.
Meantime, Senator Lindsey Graham wants Rahami to be treated as an enemy combatant for intelligence gathering purposes. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano says that cannot happen.
Stripping a person of due process is catastrophic and prohibited by the Constitution. So yes, the idea that we have the natural right to due process, essentially fairness from the government, a jury trial, and all the protections that the Constitution provides, and those rights can't be taken away from us because we're hated or feared. But if every time somebody attacks us, we strip them of their civil liberties, we don't have any liberties left ourselves.
Wow, such an important point. But people do wonder, how will he be treated? He is going to get our best medical care.
Well, and he's going to get full due process as long as the Obama administration is in office. But I think Lindsey Graham has raised a critical point. You know, there's no due process on the battlefield in Afghanistan or in Iraq. When you're against the enemy, whether they're American citizens or not, you don't read them their Miranda rights. So for this guy, Rahami, I'd have two questions. Number one, did he procure his citizenship fraudulently? We don't know, but the naturalization oath says you have to give up all fidelity and allegiance to all foreign powers and states and potentates.
How do they prove that, though?
Very sweeping. Well, there's a lot of fraud in citizenship applications going back to people coming out of the Holocaust where they denied any affiliation with Nazism. So I want to know a little bit more about what he said on the citizenship application. Number two, you can renounce American citizenship by engaging in conduct with our enemies, by going on the battlefield. And I would argue that the terrorism battlefield is all around the world. It's not front lines in Europe in World War I. It's all over the world. So Lindsey's raised an important point.
So that's what I want to ask you next. You know, is this the battleground? You hear certain leaders saying, we are, in fact, at war. Stop saying that we're not, we are. So if that's the case, then the homeland is the battleground. I mean, doesn't that count for how we treat these guys? Wouldn't we automatically call him an enemy combatant if we catch anybody doing homegrown terror? Otherwise, why call it terrorism?
Yeah, and it's not to say we're renouncing our constitutional system or renouncing the rule of law. We're in a different paradigm. This is not like knocking over the local Starbucks. It's not the law enforcement paradigm. It's the paradigm of the law of war.
But let's go back to Governor Andrew Cuomo's comments saying, welcome to America. This is the way we do things. You're innocent until proven guilty. Let's not lose ourselves in an effort to protect ourselves. Fair point?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. It's not the point I want. I'm all with Lindsey Graham on this. I think these people are animals, and we need to set a precedent that, yeah, maybe if you're going to do this, you should be treated in a different way, and you shouldn't have any civil liberties. You certainly didn't care about mine or any other Americans, and I agree with you. I think it's time to evolve on the way that we approach this, and people like this, like you said, he certainly didn't consider himself an American, so why should I?
Well, and my understanding was a U.S. citizen could be tried as an enemy combatant if they take up arms against the United States, which certainly seems like that's what happened. He traveled to Pakistan, Afghanistan. Clearly, we're learning more about that. We don't have all the information in front of us. But this is something we better figure out now sooner than later, because we do have these lone wolf attacks or small group attacks that we haven't necessarily seen in the past. And we've seen it in Minnesota, in New York, and New Jersey just recently. So we better figure this out.
So they know they have some problematic imams, which was how it was put to me on the right. right along with the police department up in Minneapolis. And so you've got these imams. They're being radicalized here. What difference does it make if they're radicalized over there or
100%.
here?
No, it makes no difference at all. And it's a demonstration these are not lone wolves. They're getting material over the internet. They're talking to the mullahs. They're talking to their community. Happens in a lot of different ways. It's not like spontaneous combustion. That's not how it happens.
All right. Well, we are waiting GOP nominee Donald Trump at High Point University in High Point, North Carolina. He's landed. He's on the ground there. They are waiting him to take the stage. He's likely to continue discussing the recent bombing in New York City that injured 29 people, happenings in New Jersey, Minnesota. He has been hitting his opponent, Hillary Clinton, hard on this issue. So we are awaiting him any moment now. We'll bring it to you live.
Hillary Clinton is trying to lock down a group of voters many may have thought she had in the bag with all those Hollywood types she hangs out with, you know, like, I don't know, the Kardashians and whatnot. With recent polling, though, showing her lead among young voters is disintegrating, many are switching over to third-party candidates. We're finding out the Democratic nominee is pulling out all the stops to reel them back in. At an event at Temple University, Clinton made a very direct appeal to the millennial voters as she addressed her shortcomings and high negatives.
I also know that even if you're totally opposed to Donald Trump, you may still have some questions about me. I get that. And I want to do my best to answer those questions. When it comes to public service, the service part has always been easier for me than the public part. I will never be the showman my opponent is, and you know what? That's okay with me. I need you as partners, not just for winning this election, but for driving real change over the next 4 years. The fights ahead of us are bigger than one election, one president, or even one generation.
Clinton followed up her appearance at Temple with a stop on The Tonight Show. But she won't have to shoulder her millennial outreach, have to shoulder it all alone. Clinton has deployed top surrogates like Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and her daughter Chelsea to college campuses. So basically, Ambassador, what she might have been saying was, if you don't like either one of us, don't stay home. I still want you to vote for me.
Well, I think perhaps to people's surprise, she is hemorrhaging votes to Gary Johnson and a certain amount to Jill Stein, and she needs to bring those people not only back in, she needs to convince them to go and vote, which is far from assured since voting among younger people tends to be at lower rates than among older people. So it's a real vulnerability for her, there's no doubt about it. So she compensates by doing what Bernie Sanders has done, bidding for their votes, free college tuition, you
But she needs him. Because, I mean, he's really the conduit there, which is interesting because, I mean, you know, look at his age, but look at his message. So it's not always just about the age of the messenger. She could co-opt some of that, but she needs Bernie.
Well, I'm a millennial, and I find this outreach a little desperate. I mean, if you're on a date and you're telling someone, I need you, you know, I'm very flawed, but I need you, you're kind of like, ugh. But this represents the problem for Hillary Clinton, is trying to recapture that Obama coalition. She's not meeting his margins, not just with millennials, but African Americans, Hispanics, even with women. And she's running as the first potential female president of the United States. So this is a big problem for Hillary Clinton. You had President Obama, regardless what you think of his policies, he was an exceptional candidate with a message. Hillary Clinton is a lackluster candidate with no message, and that's her biggest problem.
All right, desperate. Is that how you see it?
I see it as thirsty. I mean, desperate, thirsty, same thing. What's fascinating is it really showcases, more than anything, I'm fascinated, that young millennial women don't see gender as an issue for the so-called glass ceiling anymore, which is how I feel as well. There will be a woman president in my lifetime. I don't want it to be this woman, but there will be a woman president. Hopefully it's a Republican. She has 30% of the millennial vote. President Obama had 60. It is fascinating that so many young people would go to Gary Johnson, who doesn't know what Aleppo is. But do you know what Gary Johnson is? He's non-establishment. And Donald Trump
he's an outsider.
He's an outsider. Donald Trump has an opportunity right now to gather up all the millennial votes that she is hemorrhaging, as you said. He just has to tone back some of the extreme rhetoric, especially when it comes to, you know, his Hispanic governor, race, all these sort of things. And he really actually has an opportunity. And it's fascinating she has bled so much in such a short amount of time.
It's that outsider message that is so interesting that you bring up, because when you look at the national polling and you factor in Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, as you were saying, Ambassador, it tightens this race that's almost statistically a tie nationally anyway. And then when you dig into battleground states, you really see it.
Millennials care about jobs and the economy, and they are thirsty for that business-friendly environment that they have read about that once was in America. They want that back. So when Hillary Clinton says in this op-ed, we're going to create more good-paying jobs, raise the minimum wage, and guarantee equal pay, it just sort of, the message just disappears because there's lack of specificity, there's lack of details. You can't just create jobs out of thin air. Tell us how you're going to create a thriving business and economic environment in this country that is going to benefit the
You know what I want you to
generation.
do? I want you to do a write-in for the debate.
Happily. Happy to do so.
Absolutely. All right, I want to draw everybody's attention to the center of the screen now because this is what we're watching. We do know that Donald Trump has arrived in High Point, North Carolina. We do know that he is set to speak sometime during this hour, and so this is what we're watching. Will he talk about terrorism given what's happened in New Jersey, New York, Minnesota? Most likely, we're told to expect that. Will he take on Hillary Clinton on her reaction and his reaction right after the explosions, in particular here in Chelsea, Manhattan? We're expecting that, too. So it will be interesting. We will bring it to you live as it happens in North Carolina. Stay close.